we identify this gene is responsible for this trait in the plant. Once we've identified that gene X is responsible for this trait, then we can develop what we refer to as a molecular marker for that gene, and we can follow the inheritance of that gene. And that we can do in a matter of hours. So if you know what genes you're looking for, and you know the sequences of those genes, you can literally take a plant, take one leaf off of it, grind it up and make DNA, and 4 hours later you can tell exactly which genes it has inherited. What's changed in the last 10 years is that we're using much more molecular biology. What it means is that we can go in and monitor the genetic makeup of a plant. So I take plant A and plant B and I cross them. Well, Mendel tells us that we're going to get all sorts of segregation of different traits in that population, and you have to select out the exact one that you want. With molecular biology, we can go in and we have probes that allow us to follow the different genes, and so we can just basically go in and say, I want this gene, and I want that gene, and I want this third, and I want the fourth, and I want the fifth, and I want the 100th. You know, on any given year, you'll see that there might be a dozen different commercial varieties that are grown in Florida, and probably half a dozen that make up the bulk of the production. And that will vary from year to year. They're always trying to introduce new varieties that have new traits, better yield, more redness. What we're trying to do is make a tomato that tastes better. And that is a classic case where the breeders have over the years not deliberately lost flavor. They didn't set out to make a tomato that doesn't taste as good, but it's a very complicated thing to breed for, because it turns out that that's about 20 or 30 different compounds, each of which is somewhat independent of the other. And when the breeder is trying to get his tomato that's resistant to diseases, that's big, that's red, that's round, those are a lot of things to worry about, and the breeder basically doesn't have all of the available tools to allow him to work on flavor or even maintain flavor. So it's been lost over the years because it's such a complicated trait. We use the same sorts of techniques to assist the breeder in a more traditional approach to improving tomato that's not genetically engineered. We identify genes that are responsible for important traits like improved flavor, and we use sort of molecular biology techniques to try and help them breed more effectively, and either help the breeder to put the flavor back in by using the genes that we clone that are involved in flavor. He can use those as sort of markers in his traditional breeding program and say, okay, I know that if I have this gene right here, plus this gene, plus this third gene, that I can improve the flavor. And he can use the tools that we've developed to make sure that those genes are present. The alternative is we can say, well, we have a tomato that's got all of the right properties except it just is missing this one pathway for flavor. We can give him the gene and we can put it back in there through sort of genetic engineering approaches. The biggest thing that the breeders have done is they've produced bigger tomatoes. And bigger is not necessarily better. They've bred for yield, and the tomato plant basically has reached the point where it really can't keep up with the amount of tomatoes it's producing. And so basically what you're doing is, the simple way to think about it is you're diluting out the flavor. That's true of the tomato itself. As the tomato gets bigger, basically what you're doing is just adding water. So you're taking a tomato that has X amount of the chemicals that are responsible for flavor, and you're diluting it out with water. So you're just making a bigger tomato. The other thing that they've bred for is shelf life. And it's important for Florida in particular because our tomatoes are stocking the store shelves across the entire country, especially through the winter months. While a tomato that's picked in the Everglades and shipped to Minnesota in January has to really hold up to some pretty severe treatments. And so they've bred for tomatoes that are much firmer.